I now request the convener of the conference, Dr. Nandini Sinha Kapoor.
Is International Migration Policy Changes. It is chaired by Professor Vinayshil Gautam. Let me introduce him briefly.
Exposure that I have had to issues of migration have been essentially from a South Asian point of view. And when I was visiting faculty at the University of Sussex, and I'm talking of early 70s and the Institute of Development Studies, I remember Professor Hugh Tinker at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies in London University doing some excellent research, which he used to present regularly to the School of Oriental African Studies fora for discussion. But the concerns of migration since the 1970s to now, which is roughly over a 50-year plus period, have changed considerably. And I'm going to use that span to look at issues of migration which currently, to my vantage point of perception, are critical in understanding what are the concerns of migration. So I would like to push it to the contemporary level. It would be commonplace to say that physical migration is a phenomena which has changed its character in the last 10 years in an unprecedented manner. In fact, if you look at the causative factors of Brexit, you will discover that one of the major motivating elements of a lot of votes in Britain to opt out of Europe was to handle the issues of migration which they thought they were being threatened with and they were not willing to face. Britain set out the parameters of what helps to negotiate in a white paper earlier this year, making it clear that it plans to end the freedom of movement from European Union and that it would be willing to end its membership of a single market and the European Customs Union towards this end. So that's how important migration has become. So the issue of migration has undergone a sea change. It is no longer a migration from ex-colonies to the colonizing countries, which was seen as an ugly aspect. You didn't want Algerians in France, you didn't want Indians and Bangladeshis in UK, and the list can be enlarged. They didn't want any repatriation, be it from Kenya, be it from Uganda, and then there were, of course, huge politicization of the issue. That is passé. The issue of migration, even amongst the same ethnic communities today, has become a major factor. And the position of Germany with reference to migration and the position of Britain is so well known that it doesn't need my elaboration. So that is the first takeaway you should have, the changing nature of migration. My second submission is for us to recognize that migration is no longer exclusively a business of physical mobility of people from one country to another using a passport. Because the passport holders in each country of different ethnic composition has increased so large that even to maintain a modicum of order in that country, you need to recognize that diversity is the rule, uniformity cannot possibly be implemented. And this has been an important element in policy formulation. My third submission is to look at the principle of migration under three heads, namely migration of talent, migration for entrepreneurship, and migration of skills. Now, most countries have a policy of encouraging migration provided you can carry a certain capital for investment there. And not only do you get the citizenship for the asking, but you also are seen as a facilitator of creating jobs. So this is the third dimension of migration and its policy implications. We will have to recognize that self-contained business units are at stake with reference to the issues which touch migration. Therefore, overall productivity and profitability has to be factored into this thought. I will not touch upon areas which I know my subsequent members of the panel are going to dwell upon, because we have discussed our presentation to the extent it was possible, and you will have a lot of fresh insights into what is actually happening in the ground from their remarks, and I think they're all well worth listening to. But to wind up then, what I wanted to share with you is that it is not just the profitability of the industry, but the sustainability of the economy which is at stake. So, recognition of the multiple ramifications of migration, its overlays and overtones, is essentially useful effort towards creating a more robust future, not only for ourselves, but for what we bequeath for subsequent generations to contend with. I have much pleasure in requesting Professor Brij Maharaj to follow as the first panelist. Thank you very much.
I'm going to focus largely on those who don't have immediate, visible, certificated talent, skills, or entrepreneurship. We talk about living in the global village. And in recent years, I've had the privilege to go to some Indian villages where everyone knew everyone. And they also knew, things that you shouldn't know about people. But we are living in a global village where we are building barriers, boundaries, walls. We do not want to know the other. We want to shut out the other. So globalization in the first, at one level, and one of the speakers mentioned that this morning, is about the unfettered movement of money, commodities, goods, trade. So you can buy a Toyota anywhere in the world. You can go to an ATM machine. So I'm come from South Africa, and we operate by rands. I come to India, and I'm drawing rupees. And in the next week, I'm in the US, where I'll have to draw dollars. No questions asked. The credit card rules. Simultaneously, with this unfettered movement of goods and money, there's increasing restrictions on the movement of people. Another category, which I think has direct resonance with the type of migrants that's produced from India and Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka as well, is what I'm calling human trafficking, where people are recruited to go to work in the Gulf states, etc. Human rights, social justice approach, which takes cognizance of the creative ways in which different forms of migrants, including the irregular and undocumented migrants, contribute to local economies. Thank you.
The idea is to say that often governments with their policies influence the type of migrants they have in a country. In Malaysia, for example, it has been since the 2000s quite easy to get a student visa. And so there are many students now in Malaysia from developing countries, as these institutions encouraged students from developing countries. So then these students came and they realized that they were not allowed to work, or there are restrictions for students to work, and then they had to resort to some informal, if not illegal, activities to be able to pay their room rent, to pay their study fees, to pay their food, and also to save money to send home and start living after their study period in Malaysia. So this produced a kind of a problem that was created somehow by these policies and by the labor laws, and later on the government was complaining about the problem that these African students created for the country. So this is one case, and another is China. In China, in the backcountry, also since the 2000s, lots of factories are producing affordable consumer goods. Then at the beginning it was easy for people to get a trader visa, business visas. Many were coming, and then not everybody, of course, could manage to carry out reasonable trade. So, and in a short time, because these visas were limited, then now there are lots of illegal overstayers of visas in China, and so it's a kind of, what I want to say, it's the kind of visas or encouragement to come to a country which later then creates difficulties. And in the Emirates, it looks different because migrants can have employment. Many are employed, many are working there, and it seems that this kind of illegal migrants is much reduced. And to me, Africans never complained about the way the police, the authorities are treating them, and they were quite satisfied with the type of work and how the work was organized for them. Although, of course, there is also some kind of a problem in when employers in this kafala system take their passports and keep them, to force them that they fulfill their contracts. Although it seems that this system, at least to me, African migrants didn't complain about the authorities and the way they carry out the policies. Then we've heard about Australia, where now illegal migrants can no longer enter the country because they're deported right away to a Pacific island. And it seems that the irregular migration problem seems to be solved, at least for the Australian government. But what about the migrants and their projects? Because we have seen in the case of Europe or even the US that migrants try very, very hard to find ways to get into other regions of the world to realize their projects. And so whatever policies are created, migrants will try very hard to find a way, nevertheless, to realize their projects, because we also have to think about, in a global way, about this whole migration problem, which might be due to neoliberal capitalist interests, and also to, in Africa, for example, to the structural adjustment programs of the World Bank, which made youth feel they have to get out of the country because there are no opportunities for them. So, thank you.
When I was starting on this area of migration research, looking at issues which concern strategy, government, and policy, governance policy, because I'm a strategist, and I could not pick up one event, one case, one kind of research context that was independent of this whole issue of migration, especially because I am based in Great Britain. Everybody knows about Brexit. We had a very good summary of what Brexit entailed. I don't want to kind of do the woke up what was that joke? Woke up one morning at night, yeah? I don't want to do that, but I did wake up one morning and found that, all of you know that joke? I know it. Yeah. So you woke up one morning at night. So that's a joke by one of our esteemed, politicians here. But I did wake up one morning, very early. It was dark. And I found my worth was down by 20%. Brexit had happened. There was a lot of analysis. I'm a strategist. I'm not a reactionary person. I kind of analyze. But when it comes to you, you start thinking. Well, that's a lot of legacy, a lot of pedigree you can talk about. But there's something else. The European Union thing had been going on for the last 45 years. There was an experience which the people had of migrants. The locals had an experience of migrants which was not going too well, and that year it went critical. It just needed a little bit. It went critical. So yeah, I mean, yeah, race, ethnicity, religion, color, all that matters where you're from. But when you have inbound, when you have something inbound, the experience of that inbound with the locals is something very crucial. Are these two streams which meet like this? Or do the migrants kind of become a natural flow into the economic growth? Yes, you can have economic growth, but economic growth can cause a lot of disruption for the community if it is not managed properly. And that's what happened in Britain. Europeans were working with the community. I mean, even 1 out of 8 employees of small and medium businesses are European Union people. And they were doing well. I mean, we had a report which was about resilience of employee ownership. And yes, it was about small and medium businesses. They were doing well. What happened? Economic growth was okay, but these people over the last 45 years created an unfavorable experience. So let's distinguish the characteristics of migrants from the experience of migration, which happens, which is absorbed, which is realized by the local community. Yes, there is the experience of migration itself, but policy, whether it be France, whether it be talent return in Malaysia, whether it be European Union, in India, it's about attracting and working on the migrants. I want to set that straight. It's not about working on the migrants alone. It's about working on the platform, the community which is absorbing the migrants also. So the policy is not, I mean, most of the policy, if you read any policy document, it's about the migrants. But the policy is about migration. You're missing a step. And that's where you fall and break your teeth. And that's exactly what happened in Brexit. So that is the story. And now, I'm not talking about Brexit. The focus has again come down to this smart cities program that we have. Smart cities mission, Modi government's supposed to be kind of biggest hurrah, hopefully. I mean, I'm a supporter of what's happening now in the country in terms of growth, economic kind of initiatives. Smart cities program is not new. 150 smart city programs have been there, and that was last documented in 2012. Nesta, National Endowment for Science, Technology and Arts in UK has done a huge report, and I'm a lazy bugger. I went and searched for the keyword. You know, PDF you can search, find, Control F. There was no mention of migrants, returnees, nothing. And I'm conscious of the time. And eventually, I realized that it was not an issue. The common undercurrent in all these smart city programs is the IT emphasis, information technology emphasis, innovation, co-innovation, community-based innovation. Okay? So, in the context of India, though it is not said in the policy documents, there's a quasi-objective. The quasi-objective is to diffuse urban migration. Right now, urban migration is, you know, all these big urban centers. They are reeling under the pressure of inflow. You create smart cities. They'll absorb some of this urban outflow. Okay? It was not so interesting to hold you putting that paper down, right? Anyway, so what's happening there? If there is growth which is created by the community, and the community sees that there is inbound migration which is taking value, the community will generate value, other people will reap that value. The appropriation of value will not be by the community which creates it. So is the smart city program aware of this risk of the communities, local communities breaking out? So, you know, that might be an issue to consider, and that's all I have to say. The bottom line is that migration policy is not about migrants. It should not be. Thank you.
We have nearly 250 to 300 million international migrants, and that's not a small number. And it's a huge policy challenge, both for country of origin and countries of destination. Right. And recognizing these challenges, I think this year the UN has rightly incorporated various elements concerning migration and migrant-related issues in the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, post the identification of these goals and targets, there were these discussions with various countries to develop migration-specific targets for each country. Now, most of the countries are in the process of identification of these targets for SDGs relating to migration and also other targets. Now, here, I think the whole issue of countries facing various kinds of challenges in identifying the targets for migration-related issues, they will start cropping up slowly. Now, each country, as part of its commitments to the UN system, will have to understand, the country profile of, the international migration and migrants' lives, and have to come out with targets. Now, while doing so, I think the challenges that the countries face will be the following. One is they will look for best practices in the region. Okay, if it is in the case of India, we are known for major origin country for migrants. I mean, major source nation for migration. So we will look for similar countries which are known for sending migrants and try to understand their migration policies and try to identify best practices in migration management, etc. That is one aspect of the challenge part. The second challenge lies in the G2G dialogues, government to government. Okay, if in the Indian case, we see a lot of migration happening to Gulf and Malaysia and Singapore and etc., etc. So how to engage with these countries, to have a, streamlining migration processes, related issues. This is one thing. The other issue, the other challenge will be the bilateral and multilateral issues that will come up when you try to engage with countries of destination. So these, challenges will be very important to keep in view when you try to understand the policy challenges with respect to international migration. Now, secondly, that leads to my second point in questioning. I'm raising this issue. Are we saying some countries are very, they have well built-in systems in terms of migration policy? Some countries, are they, way ahead, in terms of having a robust migration policy? Now, that is a question that we should ask and examine as researchers. Countries have taken various approaches. Some countries have preferred migration management approach, like best example is Philippines. If you go through the migration-related laws of Philippines, it is very, very evident. Their focus is on migration management. Take in the case of India, we had several immigration acts right from 1883. Then we had it in 1922. The latest one is 1983 Immigration Act. So our approach has been, initially to advise and protect the migrants abroad, the Indians abroad. Later on, when we evolved into 1983, additional elements such as welfare, safe and legal migration, all these elements were added. So we see, a policy drift, and this drift happens mostly because of the challenges we faced at that point of time. Maybe in 1922, the colonial government thought advisory and protection was important. But now the direction is towards more of a welfare, migration management, facilitating the migration from India. So this is the way we should understand the policy challenges, how countries take different approaches at different points of time to address contemporary issues of the time. Now, while this happens, you have another, element coming in when countries try to understand how to build a robust or good migration policy that can work for their country. This is where you have global forums such as GFMD and GMG, etc., giving or sharing best practices to various countries. Lastly, we also seek, in current times, that slowly mobility is replacing, migration. So this will have again issues on social security related aspects, then circular migration aspects, illegal migration aspects, skills related issues, etc. So these are the various things that I think we as researchers should keep in mind when we try to understand what are the challenges that various countries face when they have to deal with international migration. Thank you.